give us a sense of the setting as we go into these negotiations. We've had President Trump now reach out, apparently an olive branch on ZTE. China is saying maybe they'll take another look at that Qualcomm deal. Are we headed towards some sort of an agreement from these negotiations?
It should be an interesting week to find that out. On the ZTE case, look, we don't have a lot of insight into whatever the national security issues were behind it, but it's important to keep in mind that ZTE had acknowledged 2 years ago that they had sold equipment to Iran and North Korea that violated U.S. law, and they were fined over $1 billion a year ago and paid that. This latest dust-up isn't around any new violations that have occurred. It's that ZTE apparently wasn't fully implementing some of the other conditions of that settlement they made, particularly that they were supposed to punish some of the executives involved. So I think what we have to do is step back here and recognize there haven't been new violations. We should ensure that the punishment fits the crime. And if there weren't new violations, and if this was all about making sure that ZTE executives were indeed punished in some way, I think we want to make sure that we're doing the right step here that would match that. I'm assuming there was a range of options on the table that could have been taken, but the U.S. took the nuclear option. In essence, the 7-year sanction was going to shut that company down. That seems like it might be out of proportion to what the issue at hand was. So I think, re-looking at those penalties that were announced is probably the smart thing. We don't want to let ZTE off the hook completely because they have to understand they can't violate U.S. law, but we ought to make the punishment fit the crime and then move on to other issues. Yeah,
Wilbur Ross yesterday actually in a speech said they're going to try to find another way to really skin that cat, so to speak. But at the same time, there's another drama playing out in Washington. As negotiators are negotiating, we've got this appearance between the ITC from a lot of U.S. companies who are becoming on the Section 301 proceeding. Yes. A lot of them not too happy with what's going on. Tell us about that.
Well, the U.S.-China Business Council will be one of those that will be testifying. We're testifying tomorrow on Wednesday. And what we're going to say to the Trump administration is that we want to see solutions to the issues at hand, not sanctions. I think it's great that China is sending its vice premier over. We've known him for a decade. He's a very smart guy. He's close to President Xi. He hosted the U.S. team that was led by Secretary Mnuchin 2 weeks ago that went to Beijing, and now is coming back here pretty quickly. I hope that's going to signal that there is an opportunity for the two sides to move forward and try to come to some sort of a solution to the issues at hand. There were negotiating documents for each side that were leaked 2 weeks ago when the group was in Beijing from Washington, and the gap was pretty wide at that point. Each side was staking out positions that the other side wasn't likely to meet. Our hope is that this week the two sides will indicate that they are able to start moving to close that gap. But at the end of the day, it's going to help, I think, if the Trump administration, too, articulates what success would look like for them. In other words, what would the Trump administration like to see China do that would not, for example, lead to an imposition of tariffs? Because, again, I think that for most companies, they feel like tariffs and other sanctions are going to inflict harm on our own economy. What we'd rather see is forward-looking solutions with the Chinese that address the problems there, rather than just sanctions that might do more harm than good.
You know, John, there's a lot of US businesses that have been very vocal and concerned about what the impact this could have ultimately on their businesses. What are they saying to you? One, about their investment plans. Are they on pause? And are they speaking to this US administration? And are they being heard?
Companies are definitely speaking to the administration here. Companies are also speaking, and the U.S.-China Business Council is also speaking to the Chinese government, too, because I think we need to remember the two issues at hand that were identified by the Trump administration that are behind all of the noise here were around China's practices that, in essence, force some companies, not all, but some companies, to transfer technology as the price of admission to their market, and then also the need to strengthen intellectual property protection. We would agree those are two important issues that need to be addressed. It's just that we want to see them addressed with solutions that are going to fix those issues, as opposed to, tariffs that'll just get into a tit-for-tat exchange. So I met with the Vice Minister, who was here over the weekend as the advance team for the Vice Premier's visit, and clearly communicated that to him, that Beijing needs to move forward with reforms and implementing them, not just talking about them, but taking the steps that would address the issues, restore business confidence in their policy direction, and have an outcome here that's going to be positive as opposed to negative.
John, finally, it strikes me that you knew who to meet with on the Chinese side, and that's the Vice Premier, Liu He. Do the Chinese know who to meet with on the U.S. side? Because last time I counted, we've got Wilbur Ross, we've got Stephen Mnuchin, we've got Peter Navarro, we've got Larry Kudlow, we've got Bob Lighthizer, and the list goes on. Is that going to interfere with the United States getting anything done? Normally, you don't go into negotiation with that many people in charge.
In the past, the decade or so, the U.S. has always had one clear lead on China on the economic policy side. Chinese clearly have that with the Vice Premier Liu He, but I think at the end of the day, you have to remember that the decision maker is going to be all the way at the top here, and that's President Trump and President Xi. And when the U.S. group, and you named all the names, when the U.S. group went to Beijing 2 years ago, as they left, the White House issued a statement, and I think it gave the answer to your question. And they said the team was going to come back and consult with President Trump so the next steps could be determined. I think the president here is the main decision maker.